The title of my paper is MGS and Readings on Ritual, Politics, and Social Life of Medieval Kerala Hindu Temples. This paper attempts to look into the historiographical interventions of Professor MGS Narayan in the theme of temple society of medieval Kerala and aspects of ritual, politics, and social life built around the Hindu temples of medieval Kerala. The paper will recollect the ways in which MGS constructed and reconstructed the history of medieval Kerala as different from his predecessors. The paper attempts to do this by examining the politico, socio, and economic seats of power that played a vital role in the establishment, growth, and proliferation of the Mahavishnu temple at Tirukadittanam. This is a village situated 2 miles east of Changanasheri in Kottayam district of present-day Kerala, erstwhile Travancore state in India. Tirukadittanam is known to have been the capital of Nanrole Nadu during medieval time period of Kerala region. The sources for the paper include inscriptions dated to 10th, 11th, 12th century CE, which are written in Vatteluttu script in Tamil language, ethnographic data, literary sources, and secondary literature. The paper also, in a light way, aims to look into the text of Mahabharata and examine the legend of Pandavas in connection to Kerala. Moving beyond the questions of legitimacy and Bhakti movement, the paper asks the questions as to what were the intricacies of relationship between political authority and temple administration, what are the notable features about the temple management and temple functionaries, what are the various elements of ritual symbolism within the structure and its interconnection within the larger society of the time period. I'll begin by looking at MGS's historiographical insights on medieval Kerala, particularly with relation to my topic. Since my paper deals with this particular time period, I would look at the reign of Cheras, which MGS has problematized, and he has problematized the question of the reign of Cheras, whether it is to be called Chera Empire at all, or the first or the second Chera Empire or not. He accepted the contemporaneity of different Chera dynasties and considered it best to avoid numerical order of classification. He found it convenient and systematic to designate them by means of their capitals as the Cheras of Vanji, Mujiri, Tondi, Karur, Magodai, Cochin, Trivandrum, etc. I quote, "This method has the advantage that it helps to identify them at once without making any sort of assumption regarding their period of existence or position and mutual relations." Unquote. MGS Narayan was of the opinion about the period from 9th to 12th century CE that the state in this period appears to have taken the form of a loose-knit federation of Nadu Varigal or Nadu Udayavargal, owing allegiance to the Chera king called Perumal, who lived in the headquarters at Magodai. He says that the Abhishega Nama, coronation name, of the Chera Perumals itself is symbolic of the importance of the Sanskritic Brahmanical rituals and concepts associated with monarchy in the country during this time period. The rule of the Cheras were described as ritual monarchy. The key factor in MGS's analysis of social life was the Brahmin presence in the land. MGS attributes the very significant developments of the post-Sangam period in Kerala to the foundation and growth of the Aryan Brahmin settlements with their Parashurama legend, Bhargava Rama legend. In Perumals of Kerala, he says, I quote again, "With their well-organized community life in semi-autonomous temple-centered gramas or villages and their common leadership, their canneries, Prakrit, Sanskrit languages, their superior agricultural technology and their willingness to befriend and exploit the indigenous population, they became a formidable force in Kerala politics capable of reshaping everything according to their choice." Unquote. It is in the existence and influence of the Brahmin oligarchy that brings in the uniqueness of social relations in the time period and social differentiation in the region. MGS, based on his studies of the Tiruvalla temple, suggests that since this was the case in a major temple, the case would not have been different in other temples, and concludes that these temple-centered gramas with hereditary proprietorship produced the Brahmin elite which dominated the social system. They also gave rise to the subcaste of the temple servants and tenant farmers between the Brahmin and the Shudra communities. MGS, in the section on social systems in the work Perumal's, mentions about the Brahmin settlers, the social groups employed in and around the temple, and other lower castes, and the lowest section, the Pulayar or agrestic serfs. He calls the Ulpadin and Perumudian as the sanctum keeper and chief supervisor. They were Brahmins instrumental in the procedure of accumulating landed property for the temple. MGS has called those who were employed in temple service under the Brahmins like the Poduval, Warrior, Chakyar, Nambyar, Nangayar, Uvachar or Kottigal, seen in the Chera inscriptions as Antarala or intermediary castes. The Antaralas took their place in between the Brahmins and Shudras. He opines that the hereditary occupations of some groups had already evolved even without the agency or inspiration of the Brahmins, and this type of hereditary occupation provided a powerful impetus to the evolution of subcastes within the general framework of caste. MGS has published the inscription from Trimpangot Shiva Temple, 910 CE. In the analysis, he describes the Poduval as the Karyadarshi, one who manages the affairs. Karalar, Poduval, Uralar, and the decision regarding lands donated to the temple is also discussed. The argument related to land grants and the rights and proprietorship of agrarian and tax-free land was connected to the growth of temple corporations in the region. MGS is of the view that the temples which yielded inscriptions were centers of the traditional gramas and upagramas of the Kerala Brahmins, and where a few families of landed proprietors jointly managed the affairs of the temple. I quote, "The Brahmaswam, that is Brahmin property, and Devaswam, temple property lands, were protected by strict rules and regulations, and such proprietors enjoyed special privileges. A system of sub-infeudation by voluntary surrender of property, Kilid, also existed and paved the way for the enormous growth of temple corporations in Kerala." Now I move on to the discussion of temple authority and the temple, political authority and the temple. Just a couple of points which may be a repetition, but one thing I would want to say is, Elamkulam Kunjanpillai was of the opinion that the ultimate power regarding the administration of the temple was to the Koil Adhikari, who was attached to the royal palace and often would be the would-be prince. MGS did not support this view. For MGS, the temples of Kerala were organized more or less on the same pattern as those of the same period outside Kerala. I'm not going into the 100 Years' War, which was multiple times discussed today. I wanted to bring the attention to the dating and the reign of King Bhaskara Ravivarman, because the inscriptions that I based this paper are attributed to King Bhaskara Varma. So MGS discussed and decided the identity and date of Bhaskara Ravivarman Manukuladitya in one of his earlier articles in 1969. Later in the book, Pedimals of Kerala, he says that the argument and confusion regarding the identity and date of Bhaskara Ravivarma Manukuladitya has been settled once and for all. The concept of political rule and legitimacy through religious ideas and ritual authority has been thoroughly worked upon and established by many historians, including MGS Narayan, Keshavan Velathat, Charles Drekemir, Meera Vishwanathan, and others. In the paper, I go on to give a list of names largely, or terms largely, indicating groups or positions of political authority which are associated with the temple of Tirukadittanam. I'm not going to read out all the terminologies here, but then the terms are discussed in the paper. With regard to the text of Mahabharata and the temple, Tirukadithanam temple, it has a very fascinating connection to the stories of the famous Indian epic Mahabharata. The Itihasa Purana tradition of Indian subcontinent is very rich and is one which has been worked upon again by multiple historians. Narrations of Vanaprastha of the Pandavas and their pilgrimages have been interpreted as events of migration in early India. These have widespread variations in regional and vernacular literature and accounts. Now I would like to go on to certain legends connected to the temple of Tirukadithanam. In the Indian subcontinent, there are multiple temples whose origin or consecration stories are connected to the Pandavas. According to legend, the Tirukadithanam Mahavishnu temple is one among the Pancha Pandava temples. During their pilgrimage, it is believed that upon reaching river Pampa, the Pandavas built 5 temples to Lord Krishna. Among this is the Tirukadithanan temple, which was built by Sahadeva for Lord Krishna. There are other 5 names and 5 temples associated with each one of the Pandavas as such. I would not attempt to go on to discuss about the epic or the place names discussed in it, but rather would just like to mention one aspect, that is from the epic in itself. The Digvijaya Parva says that Sahadeva used messengers to subjugate and obtain tribute from the Pandya, Dravidas, Chodras, Keralas, the Andhras, the Talavanas, Kalingas, Ushtrakarnikas, the Anarchis, and Romans, and the city of Greeks. So that is one of the evidences or reports that you get from the epic in itself. But we also find references of Pandavas and kings of Kerala region in Kavya literature as well. Annadhatra Charida is the Sanskrit drama written by Professor Balarama Panikar, the plot of which is based on a myth of Sangam period connected with the epic Mahabharata. So within this particular Sanskrit drama, there are mentions about King Udiyan Cheraladin, who is said to have organized a very large meal during the Mahabharata war as such. So the third act of the drama, it talks about arrangements of the voyage of Vanchishwara towards Kurukshetra, and the place name Vanchi finds mention in Sangam texts as the place of residence of some Chera kings. While some of the Chera kings lived in Tundi, others lived in Karuvur. So there are mentions in other literature, as in the Kavya literature as well. I come back to the epigraphical data that we have. We have evidences which point to the institution of Mahabharata, that is, expounding of Mahabharata, which was prevalent and conducted in high reverence in the temples of medieval Kerala. The Tirukadithanam inscription dated 992 CE, it talks about the reading of Mahabharata for which land was granted. This supply of money should not be stopped by anyone. The money due from the lands should not be used for any other purpose, should not be embezzled, or the charity should not be obstructed. It was decided in the meeting that the Uralars and Paradai should not accept bribes for the appointment of the reader and expounder of the Mahabharata. We read that it was decided that the expenditure of money to be spent on the reading of Mahabharata should not be stopped. Land was granted for this purpose. We see that the post of the reader of Mahabharata was taken into consideration with due respect and importance, that the selection of Mahabharatam Vaikimavar should be done on a fair basis. We see an involvement of higher officials of the village in the selection process and in the well-being of this person. It was clearly recorded that the money meant for the reading and expounding should not be taken or diverted for any other purposes as such. It is said that the Uralars and Paradai should collect and remit the income to the temple, but should not take bribes for the appointment of this particular post. I could interview a couple of devotees of the Tirukadithanam temple. One was Mr. Rajiv K. Nair, a native of Changnasheri and a frequent visitor to the temple. He spoke about the Pancha Pandava temples and Sahadevan, who worships Krishna in temple as its peculiarity. He mentions about Deepa Mahotsavam, the festival held in the temple. He said that the legend connected to this is that when Pandavas returned from the war, they saw Kunti Devi, wife of King Pandu and the mother of Karna, Yudhishthira and Arjuna, who was ready to jump into the sacred pyre, and they called her back and prevented her from doing that. Deepa Mahotsavam is the annual festival of the temple that begins on Tiruvonam in Malayalam month of Vrishchigam and concludes with Aratu on the 10th day. In the temple, between the pond and the eastern entrance, there is an interesting structure of a granite stone statue of a man in a flat lying position on a stone pillar about 6 feet height. The stone only supports the statue on his waist, and the rest of the body is unsupported. Legend associated with these points out to corruption and strict measures taken by the temple. It is said that once a caretaker of the temple opened its doors for a king after the last ritual of putting the deity to sleep against rules, accepting bribe. The rulers of Nandrule Nadu are said to have known about this and beheaded the man, and soon the king fell ill and died. The story has slightly different variations. It is in commemoration of this incident that the statue is installed. Another account given by Mrs. Lakshmi Rahul, again a native of Changanasheri. She's currently employed in Bahrain at the time of the interview, and she spoke about the deep devotion to the temple. She said that the popular belief was that the god was very powerful and any prayer made would be answered. She was not aware of the story of the statue found in the temple, but the connection with Sahadeva was known to her. I go on to describe and discuss a little bit more about Vaishnavism and the region of Kerala as such. I wouldn't go much detail into it, but just one aspect. The presiding deity of the Tirukaditana Mahavishnu temple is in the form of Adbhuta Narayanan or Amiruda Narayanan. Amrita Narayana Perumal and Karpagavalli are the main deities here. The iconography is that of Chadurbahu idol, which is 6 feet tall, or Krishna in Vishwarupa image, the one as depicted to Arjuna during the Kurukshetra war. There's also a section discussing about the ritual of burning of perpetual lamp. This is about something which we get evidences from the inscriptional reading as such. So 992 CE inscription, it mentions provisions regarding burning of perpetual lamps, the feeding of brahmanas, and the reading of Mahabharata together. All these three are mentioned together. Again, it says that land was set apart separately for all three different functions. Uralars were responsible for seed paddy for the rice offering to the deity and the dried paddy for the feeding of the brahmanas as such. There are more details of the rules of burning of perpetual lamps which were laid down. When the lands were rented out to burn perpetual lamps, the person or donor had to supply ghee before the Sankranti of Vrishchiga month. If the lamp was unlit due to remiss of the tenant responsible to supply ghee, he had to pay a fine of 10 karnam of gold to the king. For the tenant who had to pay dues for perpetual lamps had to deliver one half on a particular day and the other half on another day. If the delivery was delayed for 3 days, they had to pay fines. So all these different detailing into how a particular ritual had to be performed, and in case of default, what has to be done, what is the kind of fines that were imposed, all of that we do get from the inscriptions as such. In one of the inscriptions of 11th century, we also get the name of the donor of the perpetual lamp, and it is very clearly stated as well. Rest of the paper talks about the temple functionaries associated with the particular temple and the kind of very rich interactions that went on among the temple functionaries, the kind of conflicts that went on among them, between them. There are instances where we see that a triple layer of authority or political authority was employed in order to solve the conflict as such. There were rules laid down concerning the functionaries' appointments and tenures of work. It also again talks about the bribes, that it should not be, or people should not be taking bribes with regard to the appointment. The Stanatar and Paradaimar were not allowed to assume the office of the Shantikar and the subordinate offices under him. So with regard to particular temple functionaries, we have a number of evidences, a lot of references with regard to how it had to be performed and what happens in case if this is not performed. We have one inscription where it talks about those who performed the Shanti, and they were entrusted to supervise the temple servants in the manner that was desired. We see the enrollment of supervision by the Shanti and Gana over the settled affairs of Kottigal, that is drummers, denoting the liability of the Kottigal on the higher authorities, be it ritual or administrative committee of feudal character. We see that grievances that were mentioned earlier, which I did not go into detail, in the inscription by the Kottigal were addressed, and the whole agreement was made public, engraved on the south base of the central shrine of Vishnu temple in Tirukaditanam. The publicity would have been an indication and warning to those in authority to let alone the interference in the affairs of the Kottigal as such. We also do find very detailed description about different rituals that had to be performed in association with the temple. I would just like to talk about one instance where there is a mention of the position which lost his Pandarasthanam. So the name of the person is being mentioned here, that is Tenjeri Sennen Thayan, who lost the Pandarasthanam, that is post of examiner or auditor of temple accounts, was taken away from him, his Idaiyidu, which was the site in which he was residing, and other regions, his portion in the land and his share as Padakaram in the particular land, and all these lands and sites and the Idaiyidu were taken away by the Ur, Paradai and Sakha. If it was recorded that the Kottigal, that is drummers, did not do their duty, they were fined 2 measures of goat paddy by the measure holding 3 nari. Pullipada was the term used for absentee sounding of drums. If the Kottigal caused obstruction to duties for 3 occasions during the day, the Kottigal could sound only after paying the paddy that was to be accumulating on this restriction. If there was default throughout the day, a fine of 1 measure of oil as measured by the Idangari should be collected from the Kottigal and poured over the god. The Kishandi was entrusted to collect the paddy, and half of this oil was used for the god's bath. The balance of the oil shall be taken by those in charge of the temple, that is Tirukoiludayar. There are more of these instances, and there are also instances where the state has stepped in to solve the conflict with all its might as such. To conclude, the stories and legends of Mahabharata have found a way into the everyday rituals and worship of Hindu temples in medieval Kerala. These were integrated into the socio-cultural milieu through the role and significance given in the temple prayers, the number of plays and classical literature which were written inspired from them, and various performances like dance, drama, and theatre. The institution of Mahabharata helped to spread the values and stories of the epic to the devotee. Adoption of varieties of the narrative into a number of vernacular literature in later centuries, naming of newborn children with character names from the epic, name of places in many parts of the Kerala region with character names, all point to continued legacy of the epic in the land. The political aspect of the Hindu king Bhaskara Ravivarman Tiruvadi, extending his patronage to the temple and his subsequent legitimation, is referred to from the evidence of taxes provided by Govinda Martandavarman, the chieftain of Venad, to the temple. Instances of forcible donation in the form of oil and imposition of fines in default of the payment shows the degree of power vested in the authorities. There are ample evidences of various arrangements resolved upon in the meeting of the Uralar, the Paradayar, and the poduvals held in the temple. These arrangements bring to notice a few things. One, the power possessed by these authorities over the ritual, social, and economic space of the temple. How did these authorities have a very significant say into the day-to-day affairs of the temple administration? Second, the supervision over the temple functionaries and the subsequent marginalization of some of them. Third, the peculiarities of ritual practices, including the reading of the Mahabharata, freeing of Brahmins, and the careful providence to these by granting land grants. How these practices helped in the growth of society, where we also see the growth of Vaishnavism. The officer groups like the Koiladhigari, the assemblies like Uralar, Paradai, Ganatar exercised much power over the temple. The functionaries of ritual status like the Shantikar, Pujaris, and those of service nature like the Kottigal and Mahabharatam Vaikimavar with ritual capacities were liable to oblige to the strict laws, regulations, penalties, and fines imposed by the authorities in power. These elements of power, however, worked in harmony to bring about a smooth running of the day-to-day affairs. That being said, one should not forget the number of conflicts that we see from the inscriptional evidences in itself. The paper brings out, or tries to bring out, the impact of rituals of the temple on the minds and lives of the devotees. Though the temple management, administration, and functionaries are restricted to what appears to be a limited framework of the society, the number of merchants who supplied goods, groups of artisans and artists, the peasant communities who labored in the Jividam and Virati lands were non-Brahmins. The stories of the epic Mahabharata and the spread of Vaishnavism, along with evidences of ritual symbolism like the perpetual lamp or the temple bells, showcases continued interactions and exchanges with the larger society. This paper is heavily inspired from the works of Professor MGS Narayan, and Professor's works provide a comprehensive and critical view of the political, economic, and social conditions of the land of Kerala from 800 to 1124 CE. The very nature of the source materials probably, be it epigraphic sources, there was increased weightage and discussion to the Brahmin as the nucleus of the temple society of medieval Kerala in his writings. The social history of the temple-centered medieval society was in fact imagined and stated as one flourishing with the Brahmin as the center of the social relations. This is again heavily observed from the class status of temple functionaries, their wages and remunerations, and the style and severity of their punishments in case of default of their duties. Thank you.